In the heart of a bustling European city, where cobblestone streets met towering modern buildings, stood an iconic monument that attracted visitors from all corners of the globe. This monument wasn't just a structure. It was a living piece of history, guarded day and night by soldiers who embodied pride, discipline, and tradition. Among these guards was Corporal Lars Henriksen, a young man with sharp features, piercing blue eyes, and a posture so rigid it seemed as though he had been carved out of stone himself. Every morning, Lars would don his ceremonial uniform, a striking ensemble of deep blues, gold accents, and polished boots that gleamed under the sun. His hat sat perfectly atop his head, and his gloves were immaculate, not a speck of dust daring to mar their surface. Once dressed, he would march to his post, taking his place beside the monument with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. From that moment on, he became more than just a person. He transformed into a symbol, a representation of his nation's heritage, strength, and unity. Tourists flocked to see him daily, their cameras clicking away like a chorus of tiny shutters. Some admired Lars from afar, whispering to each other about how remarkable it was that someone could stand so still for hours on end. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, wide-eyed, asking if he was real or a statue. Others walked right up to him, trying to catch even the slightest twitch of an eyebrow or shift of weight. But Lars never moved. Not when the wind picked up, not when raindrops began to fall, and certainly not when curious tourists leaned in too close. His job wasn't simply to guard the monument, it was to command respect, and he did so without uttering a single word. But not everyone viewed Lars with admiration. To some, he wasn't a guardian of history or a figure of reverence. Instead, they saw him as part of the attraction, something to entertain them during their vacation. For these visitors, Lars wasn't a human being with feelings and duties. He was a prop, a backdrop for their Instagram photos, or a source of amusement. They laughed as they posed next to him, mimicking his stiff stance or pulling exaggerated faces. Occasionally, someone might tap his shoulder or wave a hand in front of his face, hoping to elicit a reaction. But Lars remained unyielding, his gaze fixed straight ahead, betraying no emotion. Despite the occasional disruptions, Lars took immense pride in his role. He knew the weight of what he represented. Each stitch in his uniform told a story. Each step he took echoed centuries of tradition. Standing there, motionless yet vigilant, he felt connected to something greater than himself. However, little did he know that one group of tourists was about to test his resolve and push the boundaries of respect in ways no one could have anticipated. The stage was set. The air buzzed with excitement, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the square, Lars continued his silent vigil, unaware that this day would leave an indelible mark, not only on him, but also on those who dared to challenge the sanctity of his post. As the afternoon sun bathed the square in golden light, a group of tourists approached the monument with an energy that felt different from the usual crowd. They were loud, laughing boisterously, as if they owned the space. Their casual demeanor and carefree attitude stood in stark contrast to the solemnity of Lars's presence. At first, they seemed harmless enough, snapping photos, pointing at the intricate details of the monument, and marveling at its grandeur. But it wasn't long before their attention shifted toward Lars. One member of the group, a tall man wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, stepped closer to Lars. He grinned mischievously and struck a pose beside him, mimicking his rigid stance. His friends erupted into laughter, clapping and cheering him on. Encouraged by the reaction, another tourist joined in, this time exaggerating Lars's stoic expression by puffing out their cheeks and crossing their eyes. More laughter followed, drawing the attention of nearby visitors who watched uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. But the antics didn't stop there. Emboldened by their growing audience, the group began testing the limits of Lars's patience. One woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small souvenir keychain, a bright, gaudy trinket shaped like a cartoon character. With a smirk, She hung it around Lars's neck, as though he were a Christmas tree waiting to be decorated. The group roared with laughter, doubling over as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Others quickly followed suit, pulling out their own cheap souvenirs. Plastic bracelets, miniature flags, even a pair of novelty sunglasses, and draping them over Lars's uniform. Each new addition transformed Lars from a symbol of dignity into something almost unrecognizable. His once pristine attire now looked cluttered and absurd, weighed down by objects that clashed horribly with the seriousness of his role. The tourists' amusement grew louder, their voices echoing off the surrounding buildings. Some bystanders shook their heads disapprovingly, while others filmed the scene on their phones, torn between disbelief and discomfort. A few tried to speak up, muttering comments about respect and tradition, but their words were drowned out by the commotion. Lars, meanwhile, remained perfectly still. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Every fiber of his being wanted to react, to step back, remove the offending items, and remind these individuals of the gravity of their actions. But protocol forbade it. He had been trained to endure distractions, no matter how disrespectful or humiliating. His duty was clear: maintain composure at all costs. Yet with each passing second, the weight of the situation pressed heavier on him. Not just the physical weight of the trinkets, but the symbolic burden of having his honor mocked. The final straw came when one particularly bold tourist placed a neon-colored party hat on Lars's head. The group cheered wildly, slapping hands and high-fiving each other, as though they'd accomplished something extraordinary. To them, this was all harmless fun, a way to make memories during their trip. But to those who understood the significance of Lars's position, it was far more than that. It was a blatant disregard for tradition, a mockery of everything Lars stood for. The atmosphere shifted subtly. What had started as playful banter among the group now carried an undercurrent of tension. Nearby spectators exchanged worried glances, some whispering urgently to one another. Even the tourists themselves seemed to sense that they might have crossed a line, though none dared to admit it aloud. For Lars, the moment marked a turning point, one where silence could no longer suffice. Though he couldn't move yet, his mind raced with thoughts of what needed to happen next. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about preserving the integrity of the traditions he represented. And soon, the consequences would become painfully clear for everyone involved. The neon hat perched absurdly on Lars's head seemed to glow brighter under the afternoon sun, casting an almost surreal shadow over the scene. The tourists were still laughing, oblivious to the fact that their harmless prank had pushed things too far. But for Lars, every second felt like an eternity. His training had prepared him for countless scenarios: how to handle threats, how to respond to emergencies. But nothing could fully prepare someone for the humiliation of being treated as a prop. Still, he knew what he had to do. With precision honed through years of discipline, Lars finally broke his stance. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic movement, but a deliberate, controlled step forward that instantly silenced the crowd. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as they realized what was happening. The once rowdy tourists froze mid-laugh, their smiles fading as they stared at the figure who now loomed over them. For the first time since their arrival, Lars was no longer just a silent sentry. He was very much alive, and his presence demanded attention. Without uttering a single word, Lars began removing the items draped over him. First came the neon hat, which he held up briefly before placing it gently into the hands of the person who had put it there. Then came the tacky keychains, the cheap bracelets, and the novelty glasses, all handed back one by one with a piercing gaze that said more than words ever could. Each item carried not just its physical weight, but also the gravity of disrespect, and Lars made sure the offenders understood this without saying a thing. The group shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado melting away under the intensity of Lars's stare. Some tried to laugh nervously, while others avoided eye contact altogether. One man attempted to joke about it, muttering something about just having fun, but his voice cracked halfway through, betraying his unease. Another woman hastily stuffed the returned trinkets into her bag, her face flushed with embarrassment. None of them dared to argue or resist, as Lars methodically reclaimed his dignity and the honor of his uniform. As the last item was removed, Lars straightened his posture, ensuring his uniform was impeccable once again. He didn't need to shout or lecture. His actions spoke volumes. To those watching, it was clear that this wasn't just about a few souvenirs. It was about respect. Respect for tradition, for service, and for the sacrifices made by countless individuals who had worn the same uniform before him. The tourists may not have understood the depth of what they had done, but in that moment, they couldn't deny the seriousness of the situation. The tension in the air was palpable. Bystanders exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly at Lars's composure, while others whispered among themselves about how wrong the tourists had been. A few even applauded quietly, though Lars didn't acknowledge it. His focus remained unwavering, his expression stoic as he resumed his original position beside the monument. It was as if nothing had happened, at least, not to the untrained eye, but everyone present knew better. Something had shifted. For the tourists, the playful mood was gone, replaced by an awkward silence. They shuffled away from Lars, their earlier confidence shattered. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the crowd, and within minutes, someone had alerted the authorities. Military police arrived swiftly, their stern expressions matching the gravity of the incident. As they approached the group, the tourists looked increasingly uneasy, realizing that their actions might carry consequences beyond public shame. Lars, however, stood tall once more, resuming his role as guardian of the monument. Though he showed no visible reaction, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had upheld his duty, not with anger or aggression, but with dignity and resolve. And yet, deep down, he couldn't help but wonder, would this moment serve as a lesson, or merely a fleeting memory for those involved? Only time would tell. Years passed, and the incident at the monument became more than just a story. It evolved into a legend of sorts, woven into the fabric of both local lore and global discussions about respect and tradition. Corporal Lars Henriksen eventually retired from his service, leaving behind a legacy that transcended his years in uniform. His name wasn't forgotten. It lived on in plaques, speeches, and even educational materials designed to teach travelers about cultural sensitivity. Schools included his story in lessons about civics and responsibility, while travel guides referenced him as an example of why understanding local customs matters. The monument itself underwent subtle changes over time. New statues were erected nearby, honoring ceremonial guards who had served with distinction throughout history. Among them stood a figure modeled after Lars, a silent sentinel carved from stone, its eyes fixed forward with unwavering resolve. At its base, an inscription read, "Respect is the bridge between cultures. Honor those who guard our heritage." Tourists now paused to read these words, reflecting on their meaning before continuing their exploration of the site. The square, once bustling with carefree energy, now carried an air of reverence, a testament to how one moment could reshape collective attitudes. For the tourists involved in the incident, life moved forward, though scars, both literal and metaphorical, remained. Some worked tirelessly to rebuild their reputations, volunteering with organizations focused on cross-cultural education, or speaking publicly about the importance of respecting traditions abroad. Others faded into obscurity, choosing quieter lives away from the spotlight. Regardless of their paths, none forgot the lessons they had learned that day. Their actions became cautionary tales told in classrooms, travel seminars, and online forums, reminding future generations of the consequences of thoughtlessness. Major Elise Anderson, who had overseen the aftermath of the incident, often reflected on its broader impact. "It's not just about what happened that day," she would say during interviews. "It's about how we grow from it. Every culture has something valuable to offer, and every person deserves to be treated with dignity. That's the message we need to carry forward." Lars, for his part, embraced retirement with quiet grace. He returned to his hometown, where he spent his days gardening, mentoring young cadets, and occasionally visiting schools to share his experiences. Though he never sought fame, he understood the weight of his role in shaping public perception. When asked why he remained so calm during the incident, his answer was always simple: "I didn't stand there for myself. I stood there for everyone who came before me, and everyone who will come after." The world, too, seemed different in small yet meaningful ways. Travelers began approaching sacred sites and ceremonies with greater mindfulness, guided by resources that emphasized respect and awareness. Social media campaigns encouraged people to celebrate cultural differences rather than exploit them for entertainment. Even governments collaborated to create international guidelines for ethical tourism, ensuring incidents like this wouldn't happen again, or at least wouldn't go unaddressed. And so, the story of Lars and the tourists took its place in history, not as a tale of conflict, but as one of transformation. It reminded us all that mistakes can lead to growth, that silence can speak louder than words, and that respect is a universal language spoken across borders and generations. In the end, the neon hat and tacky trinkets were long gone, replaced by something far more enduring: a renewed commitment to honor and understanding. As the sun set over the square each evening, casting golden light on the monument and its guardians, visitors couldn't help but feel a sense of connection, not just to the place, but to the ideals it represented. And somewhere among them, perhaps unnoticed, stood the spirit of Lars Henriksen, watching over it all, a quiet reminder that even the smallest acts of respect can leave the biggest impressions. Months after the incident, the initial shock had settled, but its lessons continued to resonate deeply. The tourists who had mocked Lars found themselves grappling with more than just legal penalties. They were forced to confront how their actions had impacted not only others, but also their own sense of identity. In a series of interviews conducted by a journalist covering the aftermath, some of them opened up about what they had learned, offering candid reflections that revealed both regret and growth. One man, whose laughter had once echoed so loudly in the square, admitted he hadn't thought twice about his behavior at the time. "I saw him standing there, so still, and honestly, I thought it was funny," he confessed. "But now, looking back, I realize how selfish and thoughtless that was. He wasn't just a guy in a uniform. He represented something bigger than himself." His words carried a tone of genuine remorse, as though he was speaking to his past self, urging him to be more mindful. Another member of the group shared similar sentiments, saying, "We treated it like a game, but it wasn't. It was real life for him, and we disrespected that." These confessions weren't easy for them to make. Public apologies are rarely simple, especially when they come too late to undo the harm caused. Yet their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes sparked conversations among those who followed the story. Some people appreciated their honesty, viewing it as a step toward redemption. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether their apologies were sincere or merely attempts to salvage their reputations. Either way, the discussions kept the incident alive in public consciousness, ensuring its lessons wouldn't fade quickly. Beyond the individuals directly involved, the incident prompted broader societal changes. Travel agencies and tour operators began incorporating mandatory cultural sensitivity training into their programs. Guides emphasized the importance of respecting local customs, often sharing stories like Lars to drive the point home. Schools introduced new modules on global citizenship, teaching students to approach foreign cultures with humility and curiosity, rather than arrogance or indifference. Even social media influencers joined the movement, using their platforms to promote responsible tourism and highlight meaningful ways to engage with heritage sites. At the monument itself, subtle yet significant changes took place. Informational plaques were added near the guard posts, explaining the history and significance of the ceremonial guards. These plaques served as gentle reminders to visitors, encouraging them to appreciate the role these individuals played in preserving tradition. Additionally, volunteers stationed nearby offered insights into the monument's history, fostering a deeper connection between tourists and the site. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere shifted from one of casual amusement to one of reverence and understanding. For Lars, the incident became a turning point, not because it changed him personally, but because it highlighted the impact of his quiet dedication. Strangers approached him during breaks, thanking him for setting an example of patience and professionalism. Parents pointed him out to their children, explaining why his role mattered. While Lars never sought recognition, he couldn't deny the pride he felt knowing his actions had inspired positive change. Looking back, the entire episode underscored a universal truth. Traditions are bridges connecting generations, nations, and cultures. They demand care and respect, not because they belong to any one person, but because they belong to everyone. For the tourists, this realization came too late to erase their mistakes, but it shaped their future choices. For society, it reinforced the value of empathy and accountability. And for Lars, it reaffirmed the importance of standing firm, not just physically, but morally, no matter the circumstances. Though the square returned to its usual rhythm, the echoes of that day lingered, reminding all who visited that even the smallest acts carry weight. Respect, once lost, is hard to regain, but with effort, reflection, and education, it can pave the way for growth. And sometimes, a moment of mockery can transform into a lifetime of learning, leaving behind a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined. The arrival of the military police marked a turning point in the unfolding drama. Two officers, clad in crisp uniforms that commanded immediate respect, approached the scene with measured steps. Their expressions were calm but firm, exuding authority without needing to raise their voices. The once boisterous tourists now stood huddled together, their earlier bravado replaced by nervous glances and fidgeting hands. It was clear they hadn't anticipated this level of consequence for what they thought was just a bit of fun. Major Elise Anderson, the commanding officer overseeing the incident, wasted no time taking charge. Her sharp eyes scanned the group before she turned to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Does anyone here know exactly what happened?" she asked, her tone polite yet authoritative. Almost instantly, several people stepped forward, some eager to recount the events, others visibly upset as they described how the tourists had disrespected Lars. A few even showed videos captured on their phones, providing undeniable evidence of the mockery. Elise listened intently, her expression unreadable as she pieced together the story. She then turned her attention to Lars, who remained steadfast at his post. Though he didn't speak, his presence spoke volumes. His uniform, now restored to its pristine condition, symbolized not just his personal dignity, but also the honor of the institution he represented. Major Anderson nodded slightly in acknowledgement, silently conveying her respect for his restraint under such provocation. Turning back to the tourists, she addressed them directly. "You may think this is harmless entertainment," she began, her voice steady but laced with gravity. "But you are standing in front of a national monument guarded by soldiers who embody centuries of tradition. These men and women dedicate their lives to protecting our heritage, and treating them, or their role, with disrespect undermines everything we hold sacred." Her words hung heavy in the air, each sentence punctuated by the weight of responsibility. Some members of the group shuffled uncomfortably, while others stared at the ground, unable to meet her gaze. One man attempted to defend himself, stammering something about freedom of expression, and not meaning any harm. But Elise cut him off gently yet firmly. "Freedom does not mean disregarding the values and traditions of others," she said. "Respect is universal, and it starts with understanding." As the officers began questioning the individuals involved, witnesses continued to share their accounts. Many expressed admiration for Lars's composure, emphasizing how his silence spoke louder than any verbal response could have. Others voiced frustration, pointing out that such behavior tarnished the reputation of visitors from abroad. The atmosphere shifted from one of amusement to solemn reflection, as if the entire square had collectively realized the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Lars resumed his position beside the monument, standing tall and immovable once again. To an outsider, it might have seemed as though nothing had changed. He looked exactly as he had before the chaos unfolded. But those who had witnessed the incident knew better. There was a quiet strength in his posture now, a reminder that even in the face of disrespect, discipline and honor could prevail. By the time the military police escorted the tourists away, the mood in the square had transformed entirely. What had started as a carefree afternoon filled with laughter had become a lesson in accountability. For the offenders, the reality of facing legal repercussions began to sink in. Fines awaited them, along with potential bans on returning to the country. While some muttered apologies under their breath, others remained defiant, insisting they hadn't done anything wrong. Yet, regardless of their attitudes, one truth was undeniable. Their actions would leave a lasting impact, not only on themselves but also on countless others who heard the story. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, the square slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Tourists resumed snapping photos, children laughed as they ran around the monument, and life carried on. But the memory of what had transpired lingered, etched into the minds of all who had been present. And somewhere among them, Lars stood watch, a silent guardian reminding everyone that respect is earned and must be given freely, and that sometimes breaking tradition comes at a cost far greater than anyone anticipates. The legal proceedings that followed the incident brought both clarity and consequences for the tourists involved. Back in their home country, news of their actions had already reached local media, turning what they thought was a private misstep into a very public embarrassment. The group, once carefree and unbothered, now found themselves facing fines, mandatory apologies, and even potential travel bans to the country where the incident occurred. For some, the financial penalties were manageable, though burdensome. For others, the long-term repercussions weighed far heavier on their minds. One by one, the offenders appeared before officials who handled cases involving violations of cultural respect laws. These laws, designed to protect national symbols and personnel, left little room for leniency. Each member of the group was given an opportunity to explain their side of the story, but their excuses, ranging from "we didn't know" to "it was just a joke," did little to sway the authorities. The court emphasized that ignorance of local customs did not excuse disrespectful behavior, particularly when it involved figures as symbolic and revered as ceremonial guards like Lars. Among the group, reactions varied. One man, visibly remorseful during his hearing, admitted he hadn't realized how deeply his actions could offend. "I thought we were just having fun," he said, his voice trembling. "Now I see it wasn't fun at all. It was wrong." Another woman broke down in tears, apologizing profusely and promising to educate herself about cultural norms before traveling again. Her sincerity seemed genuine, though it couldn't undo the damage already done. Others remained defensive, insisting they hadn't meant harm and shouldn't face such severe penalties. Their stubbornness only deepened the public's disapproval. Meanwhile, Lars received formal commendations for his conduct during the ordeal. His superiors praised him not only for maintaining discipline under immense pressure, but also for representing the values of his institution with grace and dignity. At a small ceremony attended by fellow soldiers and high-ranking officers, Major Elise Anderson presented Lars with a Medal of Honor, a token of recognition for his exemplary service. Though Lars accepted the accolade humbly, he made it clear that his actions weren't motivated by personal pride. "It's not about me," he said simply. "It's about what I represent, the traditions, the sacrifices, and the unity of my nation." Word of Lars's commendation spread quickly, further cementing his status as a symbol of resilience and professionalism. People began referring to him as the guard who stood firm, a phrase that captured both his literal stance and his unwavering commitment to duty. Schools started using his story as an example in civics classes, teaching students about the importance of respecting cultural differences and upholding shared values. Even international organizations highlighted the incident in discussions about global citizenship, urging travelers to be mindful ambassadors of their own countries. For the tourists, however, life grew increasingly complicated. Beyond the legal penalties, they faced social backlash. Videos of their antics resurfaced repeatedly, serving as a constant reminder of their poor judgment. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, embarrassed by association. Employers questioned their decision-making abilities, and some even lost job opportunities due to the negative publicity surrounding their names. Social media became a double-edged sword. While some defended them, arguing everyone deserves a second chance, others condemned them harshly, labeling them as examples of entitlement and disrespect. Over time, the weight of these consequences forced many of them to reflect deeply on their actions. Some sought counseling to process their shame and guilt, while others immersed themselves in learning about different cultures, determined to make amends in their own way. One former offender volunteered with organizations promoting cross-cultural understanding, hoping to turn his mistake into a lesson for others. Another wrote an open letter published in a major newspaper, expressing regret and urging readers to approach unfamiliar traditions with curiosity rather than carelessness. As months passed, the immediate aftermath of the incident faded, but its ripple effects endured. The tourists' experience served as a stark reminder that accountability often extends beyond the moment itself. It shapes reputations, relationships, and futures. For Lars, the episode reinforced his belief in the power of quiet strength and steadfast principles. And for society at large, it underscored the enduring importance of mutual respect, reminding everyone that even in a world filled with diversity, certain values remain universal. Within hours, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media platforms lit up with posts, videos, and heated debates about what had happened at the monument. The video clips, captured by bystanders and shared online, showcased every detail: the tourists' antics, Lars's unwavering composure, and the eventual intervention by military police. Some viewers were outraged, labeling the tourists as disrespectful and ignorant. Others defended them, arguing that they hadn't intended harm and were simply trying to enjoy their vacation. The divide in opinions sparked a global conversation about cultural sensitivity, respect, and the fine line between humor and offense. For many, Lars became an unexpected hero. Comments poured in praising his discipline and restraint, with some calling him a true professional, and others dubbing him a symbol of dignity in the face of provocation. Memes featuring his stoic expression began circulating online, often accompanied by captions like, "When you're too classy to react but still win." His name trended on multiple platforms, drawing attention not just to him personally, but also to the broader role of ceremonial guards around the world. People started sharing stories of similar encounters, some positive, where tourists showed immense respect for traditions, and others negative, highlighting moments when boundaries were crossed. Media outlets quickly picked up the story, turning it into headlines across newspapers, blogs, and television segments. Journalists interviewed historians, travel experts, and even former soldiers to provide context about the significance of ceremonial guards. One historian explained how these roles date back centuries, serving as both symbols of national pride and protectors of cultural heritage. Another expert emphasized the importance of understanding local customs before visiting foreign countries, urging travelers to educate themselves rather than risk offending hosts unintentionally. But the coverage wasn't all one-sided. Opinion pieces argued over whether punishing the tourists was fair or excessive. Some critics claimed the response was disproportionate, suggesting that mistakes made out of ignorance shouldn't carry such heavy consequences. Others countered that ignorance was no excuse, especially when clear signs of disrespect were involved. A particularly fiery debate erupted on a popular talk show, where guests clashed over whether modern society had become too sensitive or if accountability was necessary to preserve cultural integrity. Amidst the noise, Lars himself remained largely silent. He didn't grant interviews or seek attention. Instead, he continued performing his duties with the same quiet dedication that had earned him admiration in the first place. However, those close to him spoke on his behalf. Fellow soldiers described him as a model of professionalism, someone who took immense pride in representing his nation. One colleague recalled how Lars had once spent extra hours practicing his posture because he wanted to ensure perfection during a high-profile event. These insights painted a fuller picture of the man behind the uniform, humanizing him while reinforcing the values he stood for. The incident also prompted discussions among travel communities. Bloggers and influencers began posting guides on respectful tourism, offering tips on how to behave at historically significant sites. From avoiding loud behavior near sacred spaces to refraining from touching artifacts, these resources aim to foster mutual understanding between visitors and hosts. Travel agencies started incorporating etiquette lessons into their pre-trip briefings, ensuring clients understood the importance of respecting local traditions. Back at the monument, life gradually returned to normal. Tourists continued to visit, snapping photos and marveling at its beauty. Yet something felt different now. Visitors seemed more mindful, pausing to read informational plaques or asking guides questions about the site's history. Even children, who might have once giggled at Lars's stillness, now gazed at him with wide-eyed curiosity and whispered words of admiration. As days turned into weeks, the initial outrage softened, giving way to reflection. For many, the story served as a reminder that actions, even seemingly harmless ones, can carry deep implications. It underscored the idea that respect is universal, transcending borders and cultures. And while the tourists at the center of the incident may have learned this lesson the hard way, countless others absorbed it vicariously, vowing to approach their own travels with greater awareness and humility. In the end, what began as a moment of mockery evolved into a catalyst for change, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who heard the tale.